dude, you work in math. You can't say 2 + 2 = 4, but it also equals 5.
It's very bizarre, but also suspicious to me that they would write this report by doing two different calculations in this manner. Ladies and gentlemen, the verdict is finally in. The Parliamentary Budget Officer has confirmed what we all knew to be true, that the carbon tax is a scam. What's more, that it also shows how the Liberals have been gaslighting Canadians since its inception.
Let's take a look.
Confirmed everything I've been saying about this horrible tax, this ripoff. It showed that 60% of Canadians pay more in the carbon tax than they get back in rebates. 100% of middle-class Canadians lose out.
In 2030, 2031, we'll see a net gain, receiving more from the Canada carbon rebate than the total amount they pay in federal fuel charge. That's what the PBO report says. So now's the time to clear the air on Pierre Poilievre's big lie to Canadians.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre there, as well as Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault, both claiming a win on the updated Parliamentary Budget Office report on the federal carbon tax that first sparked intense political debate on the policy more than 2 years ago, and had to be redone this year when an error was discovered. It took into account not just the consumer portion of the carbon price, but also the industrial part as well. So what does the new analysis say? Are Canadians worse off, better off, or neither? With us now, live to unpack all of that, is Parliamentary Budget Officer himself, Yves Giroux. Mr. Giroux, good to see you as always. Thank you for making the time.
My pleasure.
I left out the analysis from the introduction because I'm hoping you can explain to me and everyone listening in layman's terms, and we'll kind of go through what you did analyze. So you're looking at the consumer portion of the carbon tax, and the first thing you analyze is what you called fiscal impact. So that's how much it costs us and how much we get back in the rebate, correct?
Exactly. So how much it costs households, individuals, when we buy fossil fuels, for example, fill up the car gas tank, or buy natural gas to heat the home, etc. And the indirect costs of the fuel charge. For example, when we buy supplies, goods, services that have an energy component embedded, minus the carbon rebate.
Okay. So I really dislike how the report was actually written. I also dislike how the news media is taking the report. Now, it's possible that somebody instructed the Parliamentary Budget Office to create this report in this way. Wouldn't be surprising. But here's the thing. When you're doing a report like this, is it relevant to show the first, I would say, conclusion of it, even though it has not really anything to do with the final conclusion? I would say that's a mistake, because what people are looking for is, what's the end result? That's what we want. And we had a friend inside of Parliament give us this, and this is the actual media release that went out. So this is Ottawa, October 10th, 2024. Parliamentary Budget Officer today released an updated distributional analysis of the federal fuel charge. The updated analysis includes recent policy changes and greenhouse gas emissions projections to address the computable generative equilibrium modeling oversight in previous reports. The updated analysis provides estimates of household net costs that incorporate the economic impact of the fuel charge only. Quote, the main finding from our updated analysis is, as we expected, consistent with our previous reports. When only the fiscal impact of the fuel charge is considered, the average household across most income quintiles will see a net gain. This is where Stephen Guilbeault and the Liberals would love for you to stop reading. Okay? So basically what they're saying is, you use gas, you use diesel, you use any type of carbon fuel charge, and you purchase that, and then you pay extra as a result of that, and then at the end you get money back. You're going to be better off, everybody. 8 out of 10 Canadians, all right.
Well, I mean, think of what do 8 out of 10 Canadians buy that would have a carbon tax on it? Like a direct carbon tax.
That's like gas
your
and home heating. Yeah.
And your fuel to get to and from work or to and from school or whatnot. Maybe if you're lucky enough to have a boat, then a boat, like your boating fuel, or maybe if you go camping, your campfire fuel. Fuel, right? Fuel for your home, fuel for your vehicle, fuel for maybe recreation.
Now there's a very important word that appears after that previous sentence. What is that word? However, when both the fiscal and economic impacts of the fuel charge are considered, the average household across income quintiles will face a net cost.
There you go.
End quote, said Parliamentary Budget Officer Yves Giroux. So we went through the report and we picked some numbers out of here, but we'll get to them after Vashi's done with Mr. Giroux.
Indirect and direct costs
Yes.
associated with the carbon tax,
Yes.
and then you factor in the rebate. And
Exactly.
And what did you find?
We find that the majority of households are better off once you consider just these aspects: fuel charge paid, carbon minus the carbon rebate. It's due to the fact that the government is returning 93% of the proceeds from the fuel charge to households. But when you look at economy-wide, households pay about 68% of the fuel charge. The rest is paid by not-for-profits, companies, and so on. So the households are paying in aggregate about 68% of the fuel charge, but they get 93% of the proceeds. So that's why most households are better off.
And I think we had the graphic just up. Let's pull it up again. That shows you calculated in a dollar amount and then also as a percentage of income, I think it was, right? How much better off. And then you averaged it out. And we've got 3 provinces we selected from across the country: Saskatchewan, Ontario, Newfoundland, and Labrador. So does that mean, let's say on average in Saskatchewan, you will be about, on an annual basis, $1,200 better off than prior, like if the carbon tax weren't there?
Yeah, on average. But
Okay.
again, it's an average. Depends on the household size, on
Income,
lifestyle.
everything. Yes. Okay, that was just an average, but that's sort of like the last column. Then you looked at what you called the fiscal and economic impacts. And can you describe in layman's terms what more you took into account in that analysis?
So the fiscal impact is just the fuel charge paid minus the rebates. But imposing a tax or a charge or a proceed on something means you get less of it, obviously. But it also affects the economy in certain ways. For example, if you have a fuel charge, the transportation sector is likely to be affected, the oil and gas, obviously, all these sectors that are energy intensive. So it's very likely to reduce employment or employment income, but also investment income. For example, if you have shares in oil and gas corporations, the introduction of a carbon levy or a fuel charge is likely to reduce the profits of this sector, or the number of jobs in these sectors, or the number of hours worked, or the wages in these sectors that are affected by the fuel charge. So once you factor in these aspects or these consequences of the fuel charge, then the situation changes quite significantly.
And if we could pull that board just back up, if you guys don't mind, in the control room, it shows then on average more of a cost to Canadians. So the opposite essentially of what the initial and the fiscal analysis showed, right?
Exactly, because then you have individuals on average will have a slightly lower employment income or investment income, as I said.
Okay, so we have a chart for you. So what we did is we took the frankly terrible charts that were in the Parliamentary Budget Office report and distilled it down to a much better chart that was very similar to the old chart that we saw. So ladies and gentlemen, if you were around with Northern Perspective when we showed you the old chart with the carbon tax, it looks a little similar to that. So let's take a look. So ladies and gentlemen, this is the new chart. And what this is showing you is the different quintiles, so the different 20% of Canadians and what they make, and who actually benefits from the carbon tax. So anything in green is people who benefit, and anything in red is people who do not.
And you may notice that your province isn't listed, and that's because the only provinces listed are those that fall under the federal carbon tax, because some provinces have their own carbon tax or their own cap and trade system, so they aren't subject to the federal laws surrounding this. That's why they're not on the chart.
Correct. But in general, it's still probably going to end up with the same result. So what does this mean? This means that on average, actually Pierre Poilievre is being generous, it's between 5 and 6 out of 10 Canadians pay more as a result of the carbon tax. Here's the other thing to consider. When they're talking about the carbon rebate, what they don't talk about, and this is where the Conservatives should talk about this, is that they don't give you the GST portion back.
Nope.
And what this report also says, and this is something you should pay attention to, is that this year, the government is going to collect around $400 million in GST just on the carbon tax alone.
That's insane. And if you're Ontario like us, you're paying HST on top of the carbon tax. So that's a 13% tax on top of the tax.
It's a double whammy. So
it's horrible.
The GST portion of that HST goes over to the government, and then the province takes the rest of it.
And none of these calculations that you'll see on mainstream media from the parliamentary budget officer include that HST or that GST that you're paying on top of the carbon tax. So that's not factored into any of their monetary calculations. You are in fact worse off because you are paying that HST or that GST on top of the carbon tax, and you're not getting that back. So it's not factored into any of those calculations at all.
And by 2030-31, which is where these models are concluding at, that means that with the increases projected in the carbon tax and all this stuff, this ends up being $700 million in GST that is going to be collected and not returned to you in that last year for a grand total, ladies and gentlemen, of $4 billion. $4 billion in the tax on a tax that goes to the federal government. And they are trying to sit there with a straight face and say that, oh, well, this is neutral. It is absolutely not neutral, ladies and gentlemen. If you took $4 billion and said, you know what, I'm going to give that back to every single Canadian, that's $200 back in every Canadian's pocket. Every Canadian. So, no, this is not correct. And the fact that this is broken up into two kind of rationales, they just showed it to you on CTV, you can see where the government and Guilbeault are essentially resting their hat on.
Well, why would you create a report that's like, oh, if you calculate it this way, then it's positive for Canadians. But if you calculate it this way, it's really negative for Canadians. Like that, to me, I think was done on purpose so that the Liberals could point to it and go, oh, see, Canadians are better off, so that it fits their narrative.
Well, and the thing that is kind of disgusting, and we're not going to bother showing it, is they continue talking on CTV, and Vashi ends up saying, okay, so how can Stephen Guilbeault say one thing and Pierre say the other thing? And then Yves says, kind of tongue in cheek, well, they're kind of both right. No. Dude, you work in math. You can't say 2 + 2 = 4, but it also equals 5. Like, you can't do that.
Yeah, but if we rearrange them like this, maybe they equal 5. Like, it's very bizarre, but also suspicious to me that they would write this report by doing two different calculations in this manner.
Well, and here, you can look at the report. This is the report, and you can find it as a link in the description, and you can see in the highlights, right? You can see in the highlights, third paragraph, in 2030-31, taking into consideration both fiscal and economic impacts, PBO estimates that the average household in each of the backstop provinces will see a net cost, paying more in the federal fuel charge and related goods and services tax, as well as receiving lower incomes. It's right there.
And if you folks would like to see the full report, as always, we'll have a link in the description.
So there it is, folks. The debate is over. The discussion is closed. And if anybody wants to argue with you on this, oh, well, the carbon tax is revenue neutral and it puts more money. No, you take them to this report and you look at the third paragraph down. It's super easy. It says, taking account into all factors, the average family sees a net loss. So, yeah, if the Liberals really want to die on this hill, you are welcome to do it.